did New Zealand's wealthiest school become the centre of one of the country's biggest sexual abuse cases? At the boys-only boarding school Dilworth, hundreds of students suffered serious abuse over 3 decades. What's more, they say the school went out of its way to cover it up.
Dilworth, a school that had a sparkling reputation and a noble goal: to take in disadvantaged children and give them education, faith and opportunity. The school that promised these boys so much instead took everything from them. Nestled in the heart of Auckland's Remuera is a century-old boarding school. Its founders were James and Isabella Dilworth, a childless couple who left behind their property fortune and a lofty vision. Documents show that in 1978, Dilworth knew at least 5 other students were being abused by Peter Taylor. That number later grew to 10. The school claims it carried out an internal investigation into the offending, but says the report was inexplicably destroyed years later. The police were never called. Instead, minutes from a Dilworth board meeting show Peter Taylor was allowed to quietly resign. Peter Taylor died in 2012, aged 74. If he was alive, police say he'd likely join the list of 12 men already charged with sexual assault at Dilworth. Police launched Operation Beverley in 2019. They've already identified 139 victims at Dilworth, and investigators believe another 96 children were likely abused.
Welcome to another episode of We Were Children, a Dilworth School Survivors vlog. We're here today with Peter Reynold, a Dilworth School survivor from the 1950s. Welcome, Peter, to this We Were Children channel.
Thank you, Greg, very much. It's nice to be here.
What year did you attend Dilworth School, Peter?
I went to Dilworth in 1952 in January, and I stayed there and ended my schooling in December of 1958. I think I was one of the youngest ones to go to Dilworth.
We have a photo of you. That must be a couple of years before you attended Dilworth.
Yes, it was. I think I was in the preparatory stages of getting ready to go there.
How did you end up going to Dilworth, Peter?
My father was the town clerk of the city of Auckland, and through that position, as a retired Navy officer, he knew R.P. Toole, who was then chairman of the Dilworth Trust Board. And it was that association that got me into Dilworth.
How did you find the environment at Dilworth School, Peter?
I found it horrific. I found it abusive. I found it uncaring. I found it everything that you would not want it to be.
You probably did your first couple of years in McMurray House, did you, Peter?
My first 2 years were at McMurray House, yes. Which incidentally, when I was in New Zealand 2 months ago, I went to Dilworth, and the location of the old McMurray House is now the headmaster's residence.
How did you find life in McMurray House, Peter?
I found it very oppressive. I found it almost, it was definitely institutional, but it was not conducive to helping a young man form opinions, form himself, become a man.
And what was your matron like in McMurray House, Peter?
Her name was Miss West. That's the only thing she was ever called. She was one raving bitch. She was abusive. She was uncaring. She was complicated. She did not really want to be doing the job she was doing. And as far as I'm concerned, she did not do it well.
I've got a picture here of Miss West I'll put up. Peter, you suffered your share of bullying while you were at the school.
I did, and it started almost from the very beginning of going there. I was in a dormitory of 8, and the second day I was there, Greg, one of the other pupils came up to me and said, "You're going to hear and see things that you're not going to be happy with, and you should not say a word about them. Just keep them to yourself, because your life will become one living hell were you to make any comments or try and report it." So I knew at that point that it was going to be a very difficult experience.
I understand, Peter, you had an issue with your glasses.
I had an issue with my actually I had an issue with my glasses about less than 2 months after getting to McMurray House. I went for a shower and I left them on my bed, and when I came back, they had been put under the wheels of my bed and were smashed. And of course, it was really a test to see if I was going to be a snitch or whether I was just going to let it pass and, treat it as something that I had to bear. So it was very unpleasant.
But this caused you some issues with your father, didn't it, Peter?
My father was furious. He thought that I was just doing it to do my best to leave that school. Had I thought about it, it probably would have been the truth. But that my father was a much older man. He was in his 60s when I was born. So he was not in tune with dealing with young people. And my mother was not much younger, to be very honest. So they didn't really understand young people. Frankly, they should never have had kids.
You had an issue with flat feet, didn't you, Peter? That would have made you a target for the bullies, I would have thought.
Well, exactly. I couldn't do gymnastics. I couldn't play sports such as cricket or football. And so consequently, I was branded a kind of a pariah. And so I was relegated to, in a cricket match, for example, to being the scorekeeper. But I was a target of cricket balls being fired directly at me, and I have 2 doozy of welts on my forehead that were produced from that kind of activity.
Peter, you also had a issue with your school uniform at one time, didn't you?
Yes, I did, and the reason being, the school had a policy of, not believing the students about anything. So on this particular Saturday, and there were several of them, if not more, my tormentors, the younger Briggs and his friend, trashed my good school uniform for going to chapel in. And so when I went to get dressed to line up in formation to go to the chapel at St. Mark's in Remuera, my uniform looked like it had been through the mud. So consequently, I got hauled out of line. This was on a Saturday because we were pre-inspected on Saturday, and I was hauled out of line. They asked me what happened. I said, I don't know. My uniform got dirty somehow, and they accused me of destroying my uniform in violation of the school orders. So they said, for that, you're not going to be able to go home. And it's sort of a form of tormenting and bullying that continued throughout all the years. If you did something that didn't please somebody, you were barred from leaving the premises. And sometimes it was for weeks at a time. Because you only went home every other Sunday. So this might have been 3 or 4 of those rotational Sundays where I didn't get to leave because we couldn't leave without a parent accompanying us. So I was then kept on the premises, made to do homework on the Sunday, and it was not a pleasant experience at all.
This is all because of the bullies, Peter.
Bullies did it. Yep.
Would you say, Peter, this bullying is typical bullying of all schools, or do you think it was exceptional bullying which only really occurred at Dilworth School?
I think Dilworth was the personification of excess in bullying in every way, in the regular bullying, sexual bullying, the whole 9 yards of it. I think Dilworth exacerbated the whole situation.
Peter, did you report this abuse to anyone while you were there?
No, I did not. In fact, I didn't say a word about it for almost 65 years. And it wasn't until the articles started appearing in the New Zealand newspapers that I got my dander up and said, "This is craziness. I have got to tell somebody now." And that's when I broke my own code of silence. There was definitely a code of silence at the school too.
If you told on somebody, Peter, you would have got repercussions for that?
Oh, I got caned so often, particularly by John Connolly, that the headmaster, that I was in fear and trembling of saying anything about anything to anyone.
Peter, did you suffer any sexual abuse while you were at Dilworth?
I did. My primary abuser was a prefect. His name was Kenneth Briggs, and his brother Alan Briggs and a friend John Hennessy were my regular abusers, not sexual abusers, but regular bullying. Names because they are both deceased. Kenneth Briggs is still alive, and in fact, after I reported this to Operation Beverly, they paid him a visit, and it didn't shake him to the point where he, commented or accepted his responsibility, but he did indeed get put on notice that he was being watched.
He sexually abused you, did he, Peter?
He did in the prefect's cottage next to the woodworking shop.
Did you make a complaint to Dilworth School about the sexual abuse, Peter?
I never said a word about it until I reported it to the newspaper, who in turn put me in touch with Bridget O'Keefe, the police detective. That was the first I spoke about it, and that was 65 years after it happened.
I understand that Kenneth Briggs was re-employed by the school.
I heard that too. I was shocked when he left, I think, at the end of 58. And next thing I knew from friends that he was back there again as a tutor. And I had grave concerns about the safety of the students because of the nature of his pedophilia.
At some stage, Peter, you reported to John Connolly but weren't believed?
That's right. I did on one occasion, and that was when I realized I wasn't being believed. I just, gave up hope of seeing any resolution to it.
He not only disbelieved you, he caned you as well, didn't he?
That is correct. He told me I was an outright liar, and that sort of thing never happened at Dilworth, and never would under his or any other headmaster. He was a very sadistic man, I'm convinced. His military background merely made him just the most horrible kind of human being, as far as I could see.
This caning by John Connolly, I understand he caned you a few times for no reason.
That's correct. He did. Because of the fact that I did not play sports, I was, inadequate. Even my school reports show that, I really did not apply myself as appropriate. So he took a level of delight, I think, in caning me.
Just for the viewers, John Connolly was the headmaster of the school at the time, is that correct?
That's correct. From 1950, I think, until 62 or 63.
And did he ever cane you with no clothes on, Peter?
Yes,
He did.
multiple occasions.
Really?
But, the interesting thing about that is that by law, when you are caned, no matter for what reason, there's supposed to be a second witness in the room.
That's
And
correct.
there was not. There never was when he was caning. It
And
was him and you, and that was it.
so he basically instructed you to take your pants off and your underwear off and caned you on the bare buttocks.
That's correct.
And did that draw blood? Do you remember?
Yes, it did. And then I was forbidden to go see the house nurse. He told me that, that was part of my punishment, if you will, that I just had to take it like a man.
So that was a careful cover-up by him, so the nurse never knew what was going on.
That's exactly right.
Goodness. So how did this affect your life after you left Dilworth, Peter?
Yes, it has, because actually for several reasons. Number one, it did not allow me to engage in any kind of relationships because, I did not want the stigma of getting hurt. And then number two, I chose to take a career path that gave me the opportunity to prove myself for all my worth. And I did that too. I became a vice president for a cruise line and was there for a number of years.
Could you please sum up in a few words, Peter, your experience of Dilworth?
Was actually appalling and abusive and destructive.
If you had your life over again, you would never go there.
Absolutely not. Wouldn't even cross the threshold.
The fact that your father had a relationship with the chairman of the board never helped your life at Dilworth School.
I really feel that the church was a subterfuge for the school.
Peter, on your last day at Dilworth, I understand Headmaster John Connolly made a comment to your mother.
Yes, a memorable comment. My mother was there to see me off the premises, so to speak. And John Connolly came up to her unsolicited and said, "Mrs. Reynolds, I just want to thank you for this school's greatest failure. Your son has been an absolute most awful student and has never complied with what we asked of him. And we are very disappointed in him. He will never amount to anything, no matter what he chooses to do." And with that, he turned around and walked off. And my mother looked at me like, "What the Sam Hill?" It
Unbelievable. Yeah, very. And I guess over time in your life, you must have reflected on that statement and made you very upset, I would imagine.
Well, it didn't only make me upset. It made me want to say, "Okay, you bastard, I'm going to show you what is possible." And so that was the flip side of it, where I went on to become the vice president for the cruise line.
Well, a pity you couldn't meet with John Connolly today and just tell him how wrong that he was.
Right. But I look at my school reports, and it's obvious that there was something there that needed to be addressed, but that nobody was addressing.
Yeah.
They were just in their own zone, and that was it.
Yeah. Peter, at the Dilworth Response Abuse and Care Royal Commission inquiry, Aaron Snodgrass outlined the scope of the Dilworth Redress Program. I have it here for a few viewers to have a look at.
What's not covered in the program is boy-on-boy physical abuse. We colloquially call that bullying. We believe that's a wider societal issue that is difficult for us to consider in this program.
Peter, how do you feel about the fact that your bullying at Dilworth School is not covered by this redress program?
Well, to put it succinctly, I am incensed by it because it is. I really believe that the bullying is part of the abuse and the abuse is part of the bullying. They are both so linked and interconnected that they are indeed one and the same. It's got to be addressed that way. And if Snodgrass thinks that he's going to get his way and it's not going to be addressed, believe me, there's nothing worse than a wounded bull. And I am that wounded bull after watching that video, because he is so appallingly wrong.
Well said, Peter. Well said. Look, Peter, thank you very much for coming on this channel today and sharing your story. Gratefully appreciated.
It is my pleasure to support the old boys who deserve to get reimbursed for all of the hurt and damage that has been done to each and every one of them and us. And I consider myself a survivor as opposed to an abuse victim. And I think that's what most of us in our right mind do feel.
Yes, I agree. Thank you, Peter. Gratefully appreciated.
My pleasure, Greg. Thank you.